Hello everybody. First of all, let me just thank Elena for a lovely Italian scarf and thank you, my subscribers. And let me tell you what subject I am going to share with you. And the title of this little talk is Who and What Runs Our Show. And before we start, let me just read you what Oscar Wilde said and what a little poem of William Wordsworth. Oscar Wilde once quote, "To live is the rarest thing in the world, but most exist, and that's all." But he was very clever and he lived, my goodness, he lived. And now a beautiful poem by William Wordsworth. "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting, the soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. And not in utter nakedness, not in entire forgetfulness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come, from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy." And it's in a way, it's from infant that the story is always beginning. Because it's the childhood which determines whether we can be, as Jesus Christ said, childlike, free, spontaneous, living in the moment, creative, and open to ourselves and then open to humanity as such, or whether we can, or indeed are locked up in all sorts of concocted ways of surviving and being not at all free. So what is freedom? Who is running the show? What and how the show is run? Martin Buber, a very interesting Jewish thinker and rabbi, once written a book called Thou and I, and in it he describes various modalities of surviving. He describes a people's pleaser, he describes a whiner, he describes hysterical, he describes a self-righteous human being. And as he was describing, and many others, philosophers, psychologists, therapists, family therapists, describing those positions in a various different vocabulary, he's talking and compassionately saying that underneath all these bosses, internal scripture, and internal stories lies a broken child. So when we are broken, when we traumatize, we actually probably can live entire life of ours and have not the day of freedom. In other words, we are not running our show. So let me just describe in the terms of our language what can run our show. One of the things which is very common to be mistaken for a freedom is a rebel. Rebel is a part of the script of a people's pleaser and rebel. Rebel is more obviously understood as a freedom fighter, but that's nothing to do with freedom. Being rebellious means that you have someone or something to fight against. In other words, you're not actually free to relate. It's only reactive position. Of course, in art, in poetry, in writing, in life, there's lots of fantastic rebelling and rebels who are creative rebels, but I'm not talking about the social rebels. I'm talking about an emotional script which runs our show. So in that position of people's pleasing or rebelliousness, we are locked up in this possibly passive-aggressive position that we are storing. Often we have enormous amount of aches and pains and sorrows stored. So when there is an occasion that we can punch, it might last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and you may live with someone or you may relate to someone and have no idea that this person deep down is crystallized at the position of a rebel. What it means to be crystallized? It means to be unmoved. You can be completely adapted, and you can develop incredible skills. And often you can even imitate emotions, even kindness, even empathy. And so if you're not able to recognize that, because you live in a different way from a position of being yourself, you can be fooled forever. You can marry someone, you can fall in love with someone, and have zero capacity to recognize that this person is hidden to that degree. And being hidden is like being in a dungeon. It doesn't mean that we will be able to be ourselves. And we must have courage to be ourselves, however frightening that is. And of course, if it's that frightening and we're busy surviving, we're not going to do it. And nobody does it for us. We cannot ask the neighbor to live our life better, or we cannot ask the partner or even therapist. And what I'm talking about, very often in Zen Buddhists and in the Asian philosophies, they talk about this as a sort of a spontaneous living. If you think about the pianist who learns a piece, there is, of course, lots of pianists who can play the same piece of Chopin, but what is the difference is that if you are a spontaneous and creative person, if you're not run on those extraordinary different ways of possession, so to speak, in the that means that you can go to concerts all the time, and different conductor and different pianist will be almost producing a different piece of music, although the melody is the same. And what that means, that this person is training himself or herself in a creative way of living. And that is what we have to do. We have to, in a way, train ourselves. We have to go for it. We have to have courage to do it. Because if we don't, we will be literally in possession of, we think that is possession of something or somebody else, but in the possession of our unconsciousness. And if we cannot do it, it means that we will always complicate our life. In clinical language, that means that we become more neurotic. Because by avoiding pain, by avoiding complication, by avoiding being hurt, we will make so much complication that we get completely carried away, and we forget that the simplicity, the patience, the compassion is the sort of our greatest treasures. So unconscious treasures, a rebel, a people's pleaser, a whiner, a hysteric, they're not treasures. They are our enemies. They're running our show. Conscious attempt to possess our treasures, or indeed be possessed by it, it's something else. Simplicity in that respect means that we have to go back to the source of our being, as Rumi would put it. We have to be patient with ourselves, and that's the time where we can be creative. We can be really less dull. We can be more humorous. We can, what we say, go with the flow. If we are run by rebel or people's pleasers or perpetual wounded child, we become very rigid. Rigidity, it's extremely dangerous, because rigidity kills our growth. It turns us into stones. And if we are rigid, we cannot move. Growth is something which we have to do all the time. It's not something we can say, well, I go to therapist, as one husband said to ex-wife, I've done with my controlling and my rage and my rigidity. We've been to American therapists, twice, and I think we dealt with that. Well, you see, this is fantastic line, and I hear it all the time. No, the therapist will not deal with it. You have to deal with it. And 2 sessions or even 2 years of therapy, unless you really enter and see what's happening, and unless you risk not to do a thing which means freedom. If you don't love yourself, you will be just confused about it. And it is exactly what many people like Einstein would put it, think that life is a curse in a sense, and that somebody will fix it. Einstein once said that there are two ways of living. One is to see life as a perpetual, a curse and destiny to suffer, and see that nothing is a miracle. And the other way is to look at life and see that probably everything is a miracle. So Einstein was great because he had a good mother and who allowed him, like Jesus had a good mother, who allowed him to be himself. He didn't have to grow through it and battle through it. He was just seeing everything as miracle and therefore immensely creative man, spontaneous and did enormous amount of good for our soul. To believe in ourselves rather than to be a victim of reaction to life. It's kind of becoming braver than we think we are capable of, or we look at life as our teacher. We no longer seek rescuing. We look for neighbors to make sure that we are okay, but we are our boss. Boris Pasternak once said, because when you are controlled by shame, by perfectionists, you see through sarcasms mistakes of other people, but you're not going to be ever admitting to yourself that you can be imperfect. Boris Pasternak once said, "I don't like people who have never fallen or stumbled. Their virtue is lifeless, and it isn't of much value. Life hasn't revealed its beauty to them." And this is really what needs to happen. We have to have a courage to be ourselves. Clint Eastwood always, when he was, start making his films, said, "I don't like trends. I don't like to follow anybody. I just follow myself." And this is what I'm looking for, a nice quote which I wanted to say at the end. I'm always looking at people and seeing their opportunity to grow, and I provoke people. I use Cohen. I use all sorts of tricks to just make sure that they engage with me, even if they're not with me. Let me just quote something which Bennett said once, and that's this marvelous human being. Which had such a heart and such a magnificent way with words. Don't just learn, experience. Don't just read, absorb. Don't just change, transform. Don't just relate, advocate. Don't just promise, prove. Don't just criticize, encourage. Don't just take, give. Don't just ponder. Don't think, just ponder. Don't just say, feel. A feeling is not possible for someone who is not able to dream, who is not able to be spontaneous. Margaret Mitchell once said, "Life is under no obligation to please us." So we have to be prepared to free ourselves from that what controls us and possesses us and live well. So let's say a serenity prayer before I talk about anything else in the next story, because I think that probably be enough for today. So spontaneity, creativity, openness, connection to ourselves, to others, and to everything else lies in our freedom, not in our prison. So let's say serenity prayer. God grant us serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Bye for now.